to get into our webinar. We recognize that a lot of folks have a lot of morning commitments, and we really appreciate you for prioritizing joining us on our roundtable today. So good morning, my name is Sequoia, and welcome to our 5th Equity Advisory Roundtable meeting. I'm the Associate Deputy Director of Equity and Engagement with the planning team at the California Transportation Commission, and I will be facilitating our meeting today. Before we get started with our agenda, if our interpreter is on the line, I would like to pass it over to them to provide information, as well as see if our Spanish interpreter is on the line to access Spanish interpretation services. Then I will turn it over to Justin Hall, who will provide information on closed captioning and American Sign Language services. We would appreciate it if all our speakers, presenters, and members of the public giving public comment could please speak clearly and slowly so that our interpreters can support our meeting as best as they can with their services. Additionally, Justin will share some tips for using GoToWebinar, including how to provide public comment. And thank you so much to our admin team and translators who are supporting our meeting today. I'll turn it over to Justin if he's on the line.
Yes, thank you, Sequoia.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 5th Equity Advisory Roundtable meeting. Our workshops normally take place in different locations around the state. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 have required us to adjust to a webinar format. Please bear with us should we encounter any technical challenges. To the public, for participants, join us through the GoToWebinar system. Please find the webinar panel located on the right side of your screen. There you will find the audio, question, and handout tabs. Under the audio tab, you have the choice to listen in via the computer or telephone option. If you prefer computer audio, please select the appropriate box. If you prefer the phone call option, select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio PIN as directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio PIN is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak should you have a comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with other participants as they are registered to a specific attendee. We welcome comments and questions from attendees as part of each topic at this workshop. There will also be an opportunity for comments and questions at the end of the presentation. There are 2 options for participants to provide comments. You may click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Also, please use the raise hand feature as early into the topic as you can to give the system time to acknowledge you. You may also use the questions tab to submit a question or comment. Please type in the topic you're commenting on in your comment. Mission staff will read the comment on your behalf. You will not be able to be on camera while making comments. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you sharing your time and feedback with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin. Really appreciate you for bringing that information forward. So the first item on our agenda today is a roll call to establish which roundtable members are present. With that, I will please ask Bridget Driller to call the roll.
Thanks, Sequoia, and it's nice to be with you all today. I am going to read through the roll to see which roundtable members have joined us so far this morning. So if you're present, if you could just come off of mute and let me know. So first on my list, I have Connie Stewart. Connie Stewart. Okay. Next, I have Yvette Torres.
Hello, I'm here.
Hey, good morning, Yvette. Next is Jasmine Leake.
Jasmine will be joining us a little bit later.
Got it, thanks. Next is Gerard Wright. Gerard Wright. Okay, let's go to Keith Bergthold.
Good morning, everybody. Hope it's a good day for you.
Thanks, Keith. Kiana Valentine. Kiana Valentine. Oh, I think I heard you. Are you there, Kiana?
I'm here. Can you hear me, Bridget?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Leslie Sanders. Leslie Sanders. Lena Moran Asareto. Lena Moran Asareto. Okay. Naila Popardin.
Good morning.
Hi. Randy Torres Van Vleck.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here from San Diego.
Thanks, Randy. Rio Oshas.
Pina Palmucci.
Thanks, Rio. Rodney Fong. Rodney Fong. Okay. Russell Rawlings. Russell Rawlings. Next is Stephanie Ramirez.
Good morning, here.
Thanks, Stephanie. And lastly, Tamika Butler.
I'm here. Good morning.
Thanks, Tamika. All right, and that concludes the roll. I'll give it back to Sequoia.
Great, thank you. And thanks everyone again for joining us this morning. I think I saw our interpreter pop in.
Yes, Miss Erasmus, this is Claudia, the Spanish interpreter, and Claudia Lindgren and Isidro Mencos will be your interpreters for today. And we are already interpreting simultaneously in the Spanish line. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And do we have our ASL interpreter back on the line? All right. Sorry about that for folks who were needing that this morning. Oh.
Interpreter ASL, I don't know if you can see me.
I saw you pop in for a brief second and now you're out.
Here we go, here we go.
Okay, great. And would you just mind turning off your mic?
Yeah, I will do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. So we'll move on to tab 2, welcoming and reflections from previous meetings. So I'm joined today by Jeannie Ward-Waller, Caltrans Deputy Director of Planning and Modal Programs, who's joining me to offer some welcoming remarks and reflections on previous meetings. However, before I pass it off to Jeannie, I'd like to start us off with a moment of reflection and intention for this roundtable meeting. I would like to start by expressing my sincere gratitude for you all, the roundtable members, for continuing to show up and support this work with your energy and your time. Thank you for being here today and for supporting us in efforts outside of our official meeting spaces as well. We all know that the goals of improving equitable outcomes within our transportation policy, programs, infrastructure, and systems requires a great deal of patience and tenacity, and I deeply appreciate your commitment to being a part of this with all of us. As we move forward with imagining the next phase of the work of this equity advisory body, I remain hopeful knowing that there are a growing number of dedicated community members who contribute every day to improving the lives of all Californians. Additionally, I would like to say thank you to our planning team and to CTC staff for supporting the myriad of tasks required to making these convenings possible. I thank you all, and our partners as well who are on the line. I thank you all for your patience and dedication to these efforts. And again, I'm grateful for the translators who support us in making sure that our meetings are accessible beyond this space. And welcome and thank you to our commissioners and esteemed guests who are in attendance today. Thank you. With that, I will pass it on to Jeannie.
Good morning, Sequoia, and good morning, Roundtable members and commissioners and staff on the line. Really great to see you. Always terrific to hold this space and have time to hear from you and share with you what we've been up to. Since the last Roundtable meeting, we have been very busy with the new federal infrastructure bill implementation. I think you all are aware that back in November, Congress passed and the president signed a large package, large infusion of funds to our transportation infrastructure. So since that time, CalSTA has kicked off and is leading a big transportation working group to talk about how we broadly want to implement this new funding and make sure it's really aligned with California's goals and priorities. In addition, Caltrans has taken the leadership on a number of sub-working groups. I think we've actually got 12 of them, either 12 or 13. We kind of go back and forth. But a number of different policy areas and focus areas that we're talking about and working with partners and stakeholders on determining what the priorities should be in terms of how that funding is invested. I will say that equity and environmental justice is coming up in every sub-working group. So Amar and I have been having a lot of hard discussions about how do we make sure that we really have a strong equity lens in our implementation focus across all of the policy areas. And also we've been asked to convene, one group that is really focused on lifting up equity. I think it's a big challenge for us to figure out how do we do this, make sure that equity is a strong focus, broadly, and that we've got some guiding principles. And it is also a topic area that, every policy group, every subgroup is really talking about and embracing and advancing as a priority lens. So I want to acknowledge, and some of you are probably following this process and trying to participate, I know you are, that this is a difficult and time-consuming process. So we would like to hear from you if there's space at some point, in the agenda today or towards the end with the comment period. We'd really like to hear from you directly. And Amar, I know is, happy to just entertain comments and questions at any time on how we can make this process as accessible as possible to all of you, to other groups and communities in the space that, we want to make sure are a focus and a priority in terms of how we're implementing this funding. So just a couple more things on that. We are going to engage our Native American Advisory Committee at the next meeting because there is some really specific tribal government focus in the bill. So we want to use that space working with our Native American Liaison Branch to have a forum specifically with tribes. And then Amar, also, we talked about preparing a survey and putting out a survey to get some general thoughts from folks before we try to convene a working group. Because again, it's a bit overwhelming to think about how do we make sure equity is strongly showing up in every policy area. But, really pleased to see that the federal government is putting equity at the forefront. They have identified their Justice 40 policy priority, and what they are also wanting to ensure that a lot of this funding is being spent in communities that have been divided and really underserved by transportation infrastructure. So that's terrific to see. I think that just supports how important this is to us in California. And there's also, you may be aware, a Reconnecting Communities program, pilot program that is specifically, getting $1 billion out of the federal infrastructure bill. And the first round, the first cycle of that program, the NOFO or Call for Projects, is going to be coming out this spring, which is sooner than we actually thought. So we're already starting to prepare, working with our districts on preparing some planning grants to try again and see if we can get some of that funding for California. There's similarly, and I think it's good timing, there's Reconnecting Communities or Highways to Boulevards funding identified in the state budget proposal that in the governor's budget in January. So that, I think, dovetails really nice and gives us an opportunity in California to leverage some state funding investment, assuming that budget package, the state budget package, gets approved by the legislature. We can use some of that funding to leverage the federal Reconnecting Communities funds. So we've been doing a lot of work and thinking internal to Caltrans. We don't have any of these resources yet, but we're trying to figure out how we can build up a program internally so we can make sure that California and our priority communities in California really are benefiting from that program in particular. So stay tuned. We'd love to have more discussion about that in the future. And we weren't successful last year in getting the federal planning grant that we applied for, but we are looking for other ways to fund and build up that program. So that's all on the federal infrastructure bill. It's really exciting. I think, we're looking at it as this key opportunity for California to transform our transportation infrastructure, make it clean, make it much more equitable and sustainable. So it's truly a exciting time. And we do want to make sure that our working group process and our implementation process is accessible and that we're, really putting equity at the forefront. I don't want to say a lot. I know one of the items on the agenda is about the equity listening sessions, the community listening sessions. Carolyn's going to talk about that later, but we're making progress there. I think still, working on making sure we have strong relationships and engagement in the communities before we get those scheduled. So that's taking more time. Understandably, communities are really struggling right now with pandemic, with all of the many things that are challenging right now. So we are taking a little bit more time to make sure we're well connected and have those relationships established. But in the meantime, we did have 2 really successful facilitation training sessions with a lot of our agency officials, including leadership at CalSTA, Caltrans, and I think all or nearly all of the CTC commissioners participated. So really terrific to see, just trying to get all of our leadership really in the right frame of mind for active listening in those sessions, and also learn about really trauma-informed approaches to working with communities. And the last thing I want to mention is we've got a lot of really exciting research projects going with our core program. So it's great to have the support of our research program internal to Caltrans. And I think we're thinking about next year what research we want to initiate and proposing some good ideas going forward to build off the work we've already been doing, like the listening session. So just wanted you all to be aware of that. And yeah, a lot going on. Our core team is super busy. And just want to appreciate them, Amar, Carolyn, and the team, and all the work with you, Sequoia, and the team at CTC as well. It's just been really terrific to partner and dedicate so much time and energy to our collective equity work. So I'll stop there, pass it back to you, Sequoia.
Thanks, Gerard. Thank you, Jeannie and Amar, and yes, Carolyn, and everyone who's been really critical to making all this happen. It's going to be a big year this year, so I'm glad that we get to start with this group and kind of start blossoming from here with our folks and partners. So finally, I want to remind everyone that this meeting is open to the public, and we'll be taking public comment on each item after Roundtable members have concluded their questions and discussions. So now we'll move to tab 3. our October 28th, 2021 Roundtable meeting minutes. And I'll turn to Bridget. Thanks, Bridget.
Thanks, Sequoia. So I will be presenting the meeting minutes from our last roundtable meeting. The minutes were shared with the meeting materials that were published online on January 24th. And the minutes summarize the October 28th meeting and are intended to provide information. So I wanted to just ask if there are any suggested edits or questions about the meeting minutes. And I will first ask if any roundtable members would like to speak on this item. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone come off of mute. Are there any commissioners who have comments on this item? If not, I'll ask Justin if there are any comments on the Spanish line.
Bridget, I will let the Spanish interpreters confirm whether or not there are attendees on the Spanish line looking to make comment.
Sí, no hay en este momento ninguna persona en la línea de español que quiera hacer un comentario. Gracias.
I think she let us know that there's no comments on the Spanish line. I'm,
Sorry
trying
about that. I said it in Spanish.
trying to remember my high school Spanish.
There's no one in the Spanish line right now that wants to make a comment. I apologize. I got confused for a minute.
That's okay. Thank you. Justin, are there any public comments?
Bridget, there is no public comment at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that concludes this item. I will turn it back to Sequoia.
Thank you. Y gracias. So for tab 4, we will turn to Amar Sid, California Department of Transportation, Race and Equity Program Manager, and Carolyn Abrams, Caltrans Priority Populations Program Manager, who are joining us today to provide updates regarding the upcoming statewide equity listening sessions. Thank you both. I'll turn it to you.
Great. Thank you, Sequoia. Appreciate it. Ahmad, do you want me to just kick us off or do you want to hop in with anything? Okay, perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. Carolyn Abrams, Priority Populations Program Manager with CORE. As Jeannie mentioned, we did want to just bring you all up to speed and give a quick update about where we are with the listening sessions. So I'll dive right in. Next slide, please. Okay, so a couple things. So we have realized that in our efforts to build partnerships with a lot of the CBOs in the communities, we've been running into an issue of limited capacity, which I think is understandable considering the pandemic and the strain that's been placed on some of our CBOs and also just the shift in priorities. But also I think we've been trying to recognize the fact that there's potentially some skepticism partnering with our agency or just some hesitancy around that. So keeping in mind that we've been reaching out to CBOs that are more grassroots and are really connected with the communities, I think they also are perhaps looking at our agencies like, well, we want to make sure that this is a good partnership before diving in. So I frame it that way just to let you know that as a result of that, we've been shifting our timeline. So originally we envisioned these sessions to be held in January or February, and now we're tentatively planning for late March and early April. So for the time being, internally with our team, we have some holds on the calendar and we're working to make sure that those are feasible dates. And we've mapped out more options than we'll need. So that way, when we do start working with some of these local partners, we at least have some options to choose from. And then on top of that, options to accommodate the schedules for our agency leadership and things like that. So that being said, we've also put in a request to extend our contract. So rather than the contract originally wrapping up in June, it'll wrap up around October. That's more of just the administrative side of things, not as critical. But in terms of the CBO outreach itself, we have had some success with local organizations up in Lake County and also Kern County that are willing and able to support this work. So we are moving forward with getting those contracts into place to make sure that we can compensate those organizations. And then in order to supplement this process and recognizing the fact that we may not be able to necessarily partner or find an organization to partner with for all of the 6 sessions, we've decided to shift a bit and also bring in our MPOs to help coordinate and support some of the outreach. So we're hoping that given the existing networks and sort of infrastructure that the MPOs have, it would be able to lend itself well to disseminating the information about the listening sessions, perhaps notifying CBOs that they work with, other individuals and members that participate in their regular meetings, things like that. And then I know that this group has been brought up to speed in terms of the initial idea that we had to do site visits and some of these open forums. And we were originally envisioning doing those in tandem with the listening sessions. And at this point, we've realized that given the scope of our contract, technically can't do that. So again, we're pivoting a bit. And I think this will, in the long run, be a better strategy anyway. But we would like to have our listening sessions be an initial starting point. So we recognize there are only 6 of them. It's a limited number to really even begin reaching out to our priority populations. So that being said, after we conduct these 6 listening sessions, the vision is that when this contract ends, we can begin identifying other communities or perhaps the same 6 communities and doing site visits and holding other open forums, ideally in partnership with some standing meetings or some standing, whether it's virtual or in-person platforms. So that way we can continue to build these relationships. And ideally, this would be more of like a long-term effort where we continue to have open dialogue with communities, open dialogue with advocates, and we have more of that two-way communication with our agencies. And so that being said, we plan to partner still with CTC and CalSTA moving forward. And so we are thinking perhaps late 2022, this would allow us to increase the geographic representation beyond just the 6 sessions that we're conducting. And then also these would ideally be open sessions where anybody from the public could participate. We wouldn't have to worry so much about creating a more intentional space where, you know, we have to limit the participation in order to actually have a conversation. So those are some of the ideas that are in the works that we're planning toward, and we're using these listening sessions as a springboard to get us there. Okay, next slide. Okay, just a reminder, so these haven't changed, but these are the 6 geographic locations that we're looking at. So we have East Bay, Kern County, Imperial Valley, Inland Empire, Los Angeles Portside, and also Lake County. And then you'll see in parentheses the more specific communities that we're looking to focus on. And I will say the caveat with that is these are virtual sessions. And so geographically speaking, there is not a substantial limitation. So for example, in Lake County, you know, folks beyond, you know, it's a smaller population, it's a rural area. So, you know, if somebody didn't necessarily live in Lakeport, Kelseyville, or Clear Lake, they could still join the session. You know, we're not limiting participation in that regard. Okay, next slide. So as Jeannie mentioned earlier, we've done our 2 facilitation trainings so far, and those were internal trainings to really prepare our executive leadership and our other staff to be in these spaces. And so I will mention to begin with that these members are not the ones that are necessarily facilitating the listening sessions. That's where our consultants come in, and that's where our core team comes in. However, we wanted to make sure that if we have our leadership in the room, that they are prepared with the skills and the mindset to broach some of these conversations and listen and be prepared for possibly some, you know, challenging conversations. We understand that in these listening sessions, we want to be in a position where it really is an open space and we're not creating any sense of bias or anything like that. So we wanted everybody in the room, regardless of their role as a facilitator or someone who's listening and representing the agency, to really be well prepared to navigate some of these sensitive topics. As Jeannie mentioned, we had a really great turnout. I was really happy to see that across both of the training sessions, we had all of our CTC commissioners. We had representation from Caltrans, CalSTA, and CTC, and some of our additional core staff as well. Okay, next slide. So I will pause here and really kind of either take questions or thoughts or anything that folks have that has perhaps come to mind. But in general, we are looking for feedback, as always. We understand that this is a changing process. We're not going to get it perfect the first time. So if folks have feedback about the CBO partnerships or the approach that we're taking and shifting to also do outreach to our MPOs. And then I forgot to mention, I apologize, but I am working with our Native American liaison branch to ensure that we're following the proper communication channels in order to disseminate this information to our tribal communities. And so we'll be working with the Native American Advisory Committee and then the District Native American Liaisons to ensure that they're getting this information, that they're in the loop and prepared to answer any questions that might come up. And then we can also identify tribal governments or other tribal populations that we want to share the information with. That being said, we also are trying to find CBOs that serve tribal populations. However, again, reaching some of these limitations with the CBO partnerships, we haven't been as successful in doing that. And then just generally thinking about these listening sessions as a springboard to doing engagement on the larger platform. We are open to feedback and questions around that as well. So I'll pause there. And Sequoia, I'm not sure if the best way to, if you want to prompt folks at all to, if they have any questions or on the Spanish language line or any public comment.
Yeah, I think we can open it up to feedback and discussion on this item. We also have a question from our from the update at the beginning from Jeannie. So feel free to come on camera if you want to ask a question or provide feedback. And I know Randy mentioned he had a question as well.
Sequoia, I can just jump in and answer Randy's question. Randy, I was trying to pull up the info from USDOT. You asked about how do communities apply for reconnecting communities, or how do they go about it? Let me know if I'm restating the question right. But the eligible entities based on USDOT's website for reconnecting communities for that pilot program are state agencies, MPOs, local governments, tribal governments, and nonprofit organizations. So organizations can apply directly. I think, our hope is that as, the Caltrans districts, as Caltrans is the owner of that infrastructure, that we want to be at the table. We want to be championing these projects. So we would love to partner with communities or nonprofits and be, at least co-applicants, so that we're, our district staff are engaged from the front end. But if nonprofits that want to go forward can certainly apply directly. The limits on funding the planning grant is a $2 million or less, and then construction grants are over $5 million for that program. So I'm happy to send you more info or put you in the right direction, but let me know if I answered your question on that.
Okay, thanks so much, Jeannie. I apologize, I didn't mean to take away from the social equity listening session. So thanks for the update, appreciate it.
Thank you. So why don't we we'll take questions and comments first from Roundtable members, and then once we get through those, we'll take questions and comments from commissioners on the line. So I saw So Yvette, I see you, and Stephanie, I also saw you pop up. So Yvette, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, hi, good morning. I also wanted to follow up on the question that Randy asked as well, and just giving the response that Jeannie gave as well, because I know there's been some concerns about that in the Inland Empire, just with like more organized groups of like cities or agencies applying for that funding versus other community groups that aren't as organized, and so the fear that they're probably the ones who would get the funding. So just kind of wanted to ask about that, and then guess I'll leave with that first question.
That's really important. Thank you. We have really been stressing to the Caltrans district staff that they need to be establishing those partnerships upfront. So I think from where we sit, we want to ensure that that is central. We don't want to be moving forward with even, planning grants without having those partnerships with the communities be strong and the communities being at the table. I mean, really the purpose of this program is to be community driven. But also acknowledging that, a lot of communities that have been divided by freeways, not necessarily well resourced to do the application. So the agency can take on, some of that capacity and doing that work. But I envision, in any location where we would be ultimately doing projects, that we would do the planning, that there would be planning work that would need to be done up front. So we're really looking at pursuing planning grants in this first year, and then laying the groundwork and doing that robust community engagement before we're talking about any projects. But welcome your feedback on that. I mean, if there's other ways to approach it, certainly nonprofits can be the lead on applying. But given that the agencies are and in most cases it's Caltrans that's owning the freeway, that we're the owners of the infrastructure, that partnership, that strong partnership and championship from the agency, I think is critical. So we don't want to crowd out the communities that need access to this funding, but hopefully we're establishing those strong partnerships.
Can I just add really quickly, Jeannie, on the application that went forward from Caltrans for the 5 locations that were selected, they were partnered with community support, letters of support. And then after October or November, when we got the announcement that it wasn't going to go forward, a lot of the community started reaching back out of how can we further, connect on this so that we can move it forward again. There was a couple of groups, Randy in San Diego, that were actually starting their own coalition for reconnecting communities so that they can build a stronger case to partner back with Caltrans on the next iteration. So I think that kind of aspect of making sure that community CBOs are going to be resourced is something that Caltrans teams are trying to prioritize. So I hope we can continue to talk and get those connections so that it's not just coming forward as a Caltrans project, that this is Caltrans with community or community with Caltrans.
Yeah, thank you both.
Excellent. So would our CBOs encourage just initiate conversations with Caltrans staff about the process and just go from there?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, Randy. And if you're not getting a quick response from the staff in the districts, feel free to reach out to Amar and our headquarters team. We'll sync up.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
I want to add one comment question that I received yesterday from Jasmine, who is not able to join us right away, but wanted to make sure that it was in this item, is that Stockton is ready to partner, and also she was concerned that there weren't enough Central Valley locations, and so I also mentioned that we're looking into our next phases of expansion. So Jasmine will be in touch with you on bringing this to Stockton. I don't know, Amara or Carolyn, if you want to add to that.
I mean, nothing much to add. I do appreciate you mentioning that, though. I think this is a really good reminder that, again, we've had this conversation around the limitations with only being able to start with 6 sessions and therefore only 6 geographic locations. You know, we recognize our state is huge. There are endless areas of the state that we could go to, and I think just really teeing folks up to think about with our plans to do hopefully additional sessions or site visits or open forums, that if there are organizations that are prepared and willing to partner with us that are outside of these 6 locations for the initial sessions, start thinking about that, because we would be happy to, either you can tell us now or, you know, down the road, but we would love to be able to partner with other groups that are already active and engaged and willing to lend their support to this.
That's a good connection for Stockton. And I think we'll definitely follow back up with them. We have a couple of different research projects on the community siting projects. One in particular was diving deep into Stockton and the Filipino Manila communities down there that were separated. So I think, Sequoia, that connection is going to be key as that research goes forward, because it is in direct connection with community, and then also how we're going to do the listening sessions 2.0.
Since we're still kind of in the roundtable member feedback, Connie, do you want to add your comment or question?
For the unmute button. It also occurs to me, thanks that you know, we focused on geographic, but there's some real equity issues that are coming up that are related to the roundtable. For example, the state is trying to figure out how to program and create middle mile broadband projects. You know, a meeting around assuring at those projects have an equity lens. So the $2 billion that's going into rural and urban areas help with the filling the void and areas, especially that have been redlined in the state. That might be a good topic for a virtual meeting, similar to what you're doing. To have communities express their concerns related to how those projects are going. Maybe getting away from place-based and more to issues that are across the state in the future.
Definitely, Connie. I think one thing that we were grappling with early on with the listening sessions was initially we started thinking about specific groups or affinity groups, or kind of thinking about how we would do this with just 6 sessions. And so we moved away from that so that we would, you know, build on the sessions and have adequate, you know, full-on sessions if we're going to go into specific groups, so that there's not just like a one and done or one group representing the entire state. So definitely taking that forward, and those definitely could be part of our conversation, since broadband is a key focus of our 3 agencies right now.
Thanks for that. Are there any other comments or questions from roundtable members?
Hey all, I have a question. If you don't mind, I'm going to stay off camera. I'm on paternity leave, so I'm also with my baby, so I'll stay off camera if that's okay, and just unmute. But I did have a question about, I believe there's a phase 2, right, of the listening sessions. I think that that'll expand in geography, right, and include communities like San Diego. Is there any update on what that could look like?
Yeah, great question, Randy. So at this point, so with the limitations of this contract, we have to do these 6 sessions, but we're already trying to proactively think ahead, and, you know, understanding that we have gotten a lot of feedback about all of these other potential communities, San Diego included, that could, you know, host a listening session. And I think right now it's very much like, you know, internal agency coordination. We're planning ahead for that, but we haven't put anything into a contract if that's what you're asking. But we can definitely keep the roundtable apprised of those developments. And sorry, Randy, I should say, hopefully to answer your question, the idea would be to expand the geographic locations that have already been identified. So that way we can include additional areas as well.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Randy. All right, are there any other questions from roundtable members or comments on this item? Okay, hearing none at this point, we'll move on to Commissioner Liu and Mitch Weiss.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to get some clarification as to the status of the CBO outreach and efforts. Obviously with someone like Yvette on this roundtable, you can use her to identify folks on the Inland Empire and San Bernardino area. And obviously there are others, at least that I know of, in the port areas who I'd love to help put you in touch with, but I just don't know. I don't think I caught what the exact status is on getting those CBOs, contracts and relationships in place.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Liu. So to answer your question, and I'd be happy to share the list of organizations that we have done outreach to. There's about 24 that we've contacted and been in communication with, and that would help, I think, just kind of cross-reference. So if you have other organizations that aren't on that list, we would love to receive those recommendations. And if you have particular connections, I think that goes a long way. I will say to date, the most success that we've had are with organizations where we already have an established relationship. So, a member of our team or one of our agencies has either worked with them in the past or, they're familiar with us. And so I think those relationships are becoming, it's becoming very apparent that it's critical to have those. And so in the process of this, we're definitely looking to kind of have all hands on deck. I did, send out, so for some of the roundtable members who are interested in supporting this work, I sent out a request for contacts, names, and other CBO recommendations. Unfortunately, we always run into this issue around the holidays where we recognize people are spread thin, they're out of the office. And so I kind of received low response around that. And I don't know if that's really a reflection of people not having recommendations or more so that people are just kind of at capacity. So if commissioners or roundtable members have additional recommendations, we welcome those. And in the meantime, the folks that we have had success moving forward with is we have up in Lake County, we're working with the Lake County Economic Development Council and then the Lake Chamber of Commerce. And then we're also, we've been put in contact with the Lake County Tribal Health Consortium. And then we have an organization in Kern County that initially indicated their interest and availability. And now that we've pushed the sessions, I'm trying to reconfirm that they're still able to support this work.
Okay. And to the extent there's crossover between what's going on with air quality issues and these efforts, there are AB 617 working groups that the South Coast AQMD has established, both in San Bernardino and in the port area. They could probably be real helpful too. I think I suggested that before, but that's great. I'd love to see the lists and try to help making connections and making sure no one's being missed if I can get that opportunity. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I'll make sure to get that passed along to the commissioners.
I'll just jump in real quick. One of the things I was going to say, Carolyn, you just mentioned, I think we can pass that on to commissioners and ask for their help in reaching out to CBOs if they know some in their areas. And then a couple things. I'm glad we're putting hold on calendars for the tentative listening session date. Can we make sure that we send that information to commissioners and commission staff as well so that we get them on our calendars? The third thing I want to mention is highways to boulevards. As a part of the development process for the 2022 State Transportation Improvement Program. We asked each region, which is essentially each county in the state, for their list of potential candidates for a Highways to Boulevard pilot project. We didn't define it at all. We just said, here's, what do you think? And we have compiled all that. I was going to say it's on our website, but I tried it a minute ago and the link doesn't work and the title is unclear. But I assume by the end of the day today, we'll have it up there, a list of all those. We didn't put any requirements on it. And so because we're not evaluating it, you can see that some counties put more thought into it than others. And two of the ones that I think most people are talking about weren't listed by the county. I'm not sure why. But it might be something that you all want to take a look at.
Thank you, Mitch. I saw that list. Appreciate it.
I had a question about the Highways to Boulevard initiative. How does Caltrans and CTC notify cities of this opportunity? Is it going to go through the local Caltrans offices or the MPOs, or how is this promoted to the agencies in California with highways that are that have traffic safety issues for multimodal users?
Well, Randy, that's a really good question. It's certainly being promoted by FHWA under this new federal program, which is already, funded in the infrastructure law, and it's being discussed in that space. Because the state funding is just proposed in the state budget, it is not yet approved. We're a little bit challenged because we've got our core office under Amar. We've got our planning team, but we don't really have resources yet to set up staff that are dedicated to this new program until, we've got a source of funding. So it's been a little bit, what's the right word? We're trying to sort of fit it in with the other planning work and outreach that we're doing. So it's been a little bit piecemeal. I think we've been relying on the districts to help identify and reach out to a lot of communities. And then as we were developing that application for the RAISE program last year, we did do some specific targeted outreach, as Amar described. But I'll say, we're going to get better at this as we go, as this becomes, a program that is on an annual cycle, and we're more comfortable with it. I think we will get much better at doing that outreach in a stronger and more organized fashion. So I, again, really appreciate your feedback, but I'll acknowledge that even this call for projects that's coming up in the spring came faster than we thought. We thought the FHWA was going to take more time to do guidelines and put out more information before they said we're going to do a call for projects, but the call for projects came, or it is coming. It's at, they're saying spring of 2022, before we've actually seen them put out much information about what the structure and the rules of this program are going to be. So we're somewhat in scramble mode, I will admit, but we certainly, want your input. We want to be reaching out. We're encouraging the districts to do that. And a lot of local cities are already engaged. So we can do better. We'll get better at this.
And I just want to add, we're going to continue, talking about it and highlighting it. I'm hoping at our March commission meeting, we can bring in some people who can talk about, nationwide about what they've done. And, in thinking about this, there are some places it's been done across the country, and there's some NGOs who spend a lot of time thinking about this. So just to have a conversation and let everybody hear what's going on.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
I have a question. Oh, sorry, we're chaotic over here. For the Highways to Boulevard program, I think that's something that we're really excited about. I have questions about how it's going to be measured, and I know you guys said that it's pretty, excuse me, it's pretty open right now in terms of how you guys are measuring it, but are we talking about benefits? Are we going to be measuring like the climate benefits, the increase in mobility? Like what are kind of the goals and objectives of the program?
Great questions, Naila. And good morning, Naeem. As I just described, we're just trying to get this program set up, and it's not funded yet at the state level. So at the federal level, we don't have much guidance yet. Honestly, we haven't seen any definition from the federal government on what this looks like, other than kind of the broad intent language around, reconnecting communities that have been divided by highway development, highway infrastructure. So I think that is still to be determined. Certainly in California, climate and air quality goals are critical alongside, making sure that we're prioritizing underserved communities. So I think those should absolutely be the metrics that we're looking at, particularly if the state program gets approved and gets funded this year. But that's still a little bit to come. So this would be a good time, to provide input to the legislature on that and also to FHWA until they put the guidelines out. So we welcome that input. Naila, if you want to send thoughts to us, we can, run it over to our colleagues at FHWA and also up the chain. Those are certainly things that we'll be thinking about and prioritizing.
Thank you. Sounds good.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any other comments or questions from roundtable members or commissioners or commission staff on this item? Great, thanks so much for all your questions. We'll now turn to our public comment line. Are there any comments on the Spanish line?
Ms. Erasmus, no comments on the Spanish line. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And are there any public comments on this item, Justin?
Thank you, Sequoia. We do not have any public comment at this time.
Great, thanks everyone. Unless there are any other comments or questions on this topic. Great, thank you. We'll say thank you to Carolyn, Amar, and Jeannie for joining us. And we'll move on to tab 5. Thank you. Great, so next we'll pivot to item 5, and I'll be joined by Matthew Yascott, Deputy Director of Senate Bill 1 Programming with the Commission. And we will provide roundtable members and the public with an update on the SB1 funding programs guidelines development process, as well as facilitate a discussion for the roundtable members to weigh in on potential guidelines changes to better address transportation equity. Additionally, we've had a few roundtable members who have joined us to participate in the draft guidelines focus group exercise, and I'll ask them to join us before we start our presentation to share some updates and thoughts, after our presentation. Well, actually, before or after, Matthew? Should we have them before or after?
It honestly doesn't matter. If they prefer to share with us beforehand. After. Okay.
Okay.
Connie's lead.
Okay. All right. So after we give our presentation, the roundtable members who participated in our focus group will provide updates and share their thoughts on incorporating transportation equity considerations into the Commission's programming guidelines. And thank you so much for those of you who've offered to support these efforts in our focus group setting And please know, for anybody that hasn't been able to join us but wants to, the invitation is still very wide open for Roundtable members, and we'll be in touch. So with that, we'll move on to the slideshow. Oops, sorry, I just minimized my whole screen. Okay. So as we hopefully well know now, the Transportation Commission adopted a racial equity statement in January 2021, highlighting the importance of transportation equity within all of the work that we do. The Transportation Commission recognizes that throughout California's history, improvements to the state's transportation system have disproportionately benefited some population groups and burdened others. And while infrastructure improvements were being built, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color were disenfranchised and underrepresented in government decision-making. Next slide, please. Therefore, the Commission condemns all forms of racism and is actively working to promote equitable outcomes through our programs, policies, and practices. And in line with our racial equity statement, we are working to do that in all of our work. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Sequoia. I did notice, and I'm not sure if Justin will stop us. It seemed like there was a question from one of the Roundtable members.
Great. I missed that one. I think that was from before the last.
Oh, was that my bad? That's
all right.
Thank you, Sequoia, for handing it over. So this is just a bit of background. And I just want to say thank you for having me today at this morning's Roundtable. And it's always a pleasure to be with you, Sequoia, and with the Roundtable members and commissioners. The three programs that we'll be focusing on for today's discussion are the Local Partnership Program, the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program, and the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. And I always like to say, while these programs are rooted in statutory intent of the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017, also known as SB1, the Commission is committed to promoting equitable outcomes through our programs, policies, and practices. So this means revisiting our existing programs each cycle to ensure that we're continuing to meet that mission. And you can go to the next slide, please. So the first program, which I'll give some background on, is the Local Partnership Program. And the objective of the Local Partnership Program is to provide funding to counties, cities, transportation districts, and regional transportation agencies that have voter-approved taxes, tolls, or fees dedicated solely to transportation improvements, or which have imposed fees which meet that same criteria as well. The funding is meant to complement spending on transportation projects that these jurisdictions have already committed to. The Local Partnership Program has an annual funding capacity of $200 million, which is broken down between a 60% formula-driven amount to eligible agencies and a 40% competitive funding available to competitive applicants. And next slide, please. So an example of a local partnership program project that was recently funded is the Montague Expressway pedestrian overcrossing at the Milpitas BART station in Santa Clara County. The local partnership program has a very broad range of eligible project types, and some of the predominant ones are improvements to road infrastructure, transit facilities, active transportation facilities, as well as the acquisition of buses, transit equipment, or rolling stock. Next slide, please. The second program I'll cover is the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program. The objective of the Congested Corridors Program is to fund projects designed to reduce congestion in highly traveled and highly congested corridors through performance improvements that balance transportation, community impacts, and provide environmental benefits. The Congested Corridors Program has a funding capacity of $250 million, which is all competitive funding available to competitive applicants. Next slide, please. So an example of a Solutions for Congested Corridors program project, which was funded in Cycle 1, is the Airport Metro Connector, which connects the Metro Crenshaw to LAX line and includes an extension of the Metro Green Line to an automated people mover connecting passengers with LAX terminals in Los Angeles County. Other eligible types of projects are transformative ones designed to reduce congestion in highly traveled and highly congested corridors through performance improvements that balance transportation, community impacts, and that provide environmental benefit. I do want to highlight that general purpose lanes are not eligible for funding in this program. And furthermore, each project submitted must be included in a comprehensive multimodal corridor plan or a regional transportation plan, and a regional transportation plan, forgive me. For projects within the boundaries of a metropolitan planning organization, they must also be consistent with an approved sustainable community strategy. And next slide, please. And the last program that I'll cover will be the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. The objective of the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program is to fund public transportation infrastructure projects that have a high volume of freight movement and that support the goals of the National Highway Freight Program and the California Freight Mobility Plan, as well as guiding principles of the California Sustainable Freight Action Plan. The Trade Corridor Enhancement Program has an annual funding capacity of roughly $400 million, which is all competitive funding available to competitive applicants. And next slide, please. And an example of a Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, which has been funded, is the Rosecrans to Marquardt grade crossing project, which replaces an at-grade crossing with a new grade-separated crossing, also in Los Angeles County. So eligible projects are in the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program are ones that enhance the freight system's economic activity or vitality, relieve congestion on the freight system, improve safety and resilience of the freight system, improve freight system infrastructure, implement technology or innovation to improve the freight system or reduce or avoid its negative impacts, or those that reduce or avoid adverse community or environmental impacts to the freight system, forgive me. Furthermore, in order for applicants to be eligible, they must be in a regional transportation plan. And again, if within the boundaries of a metropolitan planning organization, they must be consistent with an approved sustainable community strategy. Next slide, please. So I do want to highlight that SB1 program guidelines already consider equitable outcomes in multiple ways, so that the current efforts that we're talking about and taking on this cycle will expand upon what already exists. Some examples of what already exists include, in the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, there is an evaluation criteria section, so an entire section dedicated to community impact factors. In the Local Partnership Program, there's an evaluation criteria dedicated to regional and community support and public outreach. And in the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program, projects are screened out of eligibility unless they avoid or mitigate negative environmental or community impacts. I'll also say that all three programs require applicants to include information outlining community impacts and how projects address community identified needs, negative impacts and displacement, and benefits to disadvantaged communities. So now that we have kind of covered a bit of background on these three programs, I'll turn it back over to Sequoia to cover some of the next slides, which get into some of the work that we've been doing to get to developed language. Thanks, Sequoia.
Thanks, Matthew, for that overview. So for our roundtable members, we really wanted to kind of invite you into this process of thinking through updating the draft guidelines update. And also, I want to give you an update on where we're at in our own internal processes. So in December, mid-December of 2021, we held a statewide equity-focused workshop to gather input and help shape considerations for these 3 programs that Matthew just outlined: the local partnership program, the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, and Solutions for Congested Corridors program. That workshop was open to the public and attended by many of our partners at MPOs and regional transportation agencies, as well as local governments. And we had a lot of really great and useful feedback, especially around how folks are actually integrating equity language and ideas into their own guidelines development process. So we heard a lot of feedback and are kind of working on integrating that back in our drafts, which kind of brings us into spring, where we'll plan on sharing these, how we incorporated the specific feedback that we had from the December workshop and an upcoming statewide workshop, as well as feedback from our roundtable member focus groups, which are continuing. And again, anyone who's interested in joining us is definitely invited. So that will lead us into June, where we will be presenting our draft guidelines to the commission at the June commission meeting. And then we'll go back for any revisions from that process. And in August, we aim to have the guidelines adopted by the commission. Actually, I want to pause here if there are any questions where we're at so far. Great, thank you. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. So this is my fun part I want to bring to this presentation. We'd really like to hear from you all in real time now. So if you have access to a smartphone or through your computer web browser, anyone who's on this call, including roundtable members, is welcome to open up our Slido poll, and we'd love to hear from you on our first question, which is, what are some examples of equity metrics or indicators that you or your organization have identified or found useful? And if you are unfamiliar with the QR code, that box with squiggles in it, you just you can open up your smartphone and open up the camera, and the camera will hone in on it, and it will give you an option to click on a web page, and it will bring you right to this poll. So please take a moment. We'd love to hear from you in real time. And as people enter things, it should pop up on the screen and we can see. Fingers crossed it works. And if it doesn't, we'll figure it out another time. We're trying. It might not, because nothing's popping up. Well, this is an example of a question that we asked our MPO, our statewide group workshop. Yay, it's working! Great, okay, so some of the examples of metrics or indicators that folks are identifying include travel time to work, school, etc., income as an indicator, accessibility and barriers to applying to funding was something we talked about today. Funding for leadership training for community members in order to be able to participate. Yes, that's a really great answer. Accessibility, air quality. Community investments, traffic crashes involving bicycles and pedestrians, housing cost burden. All right, we'll keep it open for about 1 more minute. These are really useful answers. And even once we transition off this slide, you're totally welcome to keep answering this question. We also do have another question for y'all. Bathroom accessibility, active transportation infrastructure plans and funding, dignified transit experiences, housing cost burden, 24-hour transit on core routes. Clean air. Thank you. So with that, why don't we move on to the next Slido poll. Again, you're welcome to keep answering this one. We have another question for you all. If you're ready to move on, go ahead. Again, if you haven't joined us yet, use your camera to highlight the QR code or enter this website into your browser. So the question is, what are the most important equity criteria to include in the guidelines update? So kind of thinking back to those 3 programs that Matthew highlighted, how do you imagine the integration of equity criteria to be most useful, and which criteria do you highlight as really contributing to that in a meaningful way? And we'll give it a couple minutes. And we really appreciate folks contributing. Intersectionality, community projects, responsive, desires, environmental, wow, I love this word cloud, justice, equity, advancement, housing availability and housing affordability, context sensitivity, communities saturated by freight infrastructure. Links. Awesome. Thank you so much for these responses. And again, we are able to hold on to all these responses, and we're going to keep adding them into our recommendations spreadsheet for all our workshops. Age, percent of elderly, equity index impacts. Great, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. And again, feel free to continue to participate in those. But I do want to share some of our takeaways from the December 16th workshop. So attendees shared feedback in the exact same way as right now with the Slido and conversation on how to meaningfully consider transportation equity in our SB1 program's guidelines update. And some of the recommendations include encouraging early community participation in the planning process, adding community support as a criterion within the guidelines, and keeping the approach simple. Next slide, please. Some other key takeaways that we heard were that overall, workshop participants preferred incorporating equity throughout the guidelines as applicable, with changes in the evaluation criteria to influence project selection. And this response was based on our question of, should we have equity kind of metrics and indicators as a standalone section, or as indicators woven throughout within each guidelines and within each section of the guidelines. And so this was the response that we gathered from those workshops. And again, specific feedback recorded from the workshop is actively being incorporated into our draft SB1 program's proposed guidelines language. Next slide, please. So as a response, again, to some of the questions that we posed in that workshop, to current practices of identifying equity in projects or practices, workshop participants recommended utilizing the following questions to help identify impacts to disadvantaged, vulnerable, or marginalized communities. And some of these questions could include, how does a project affect adjacent neighborhoods? How does this project benefit disadvantaged communities? What transportation barriers or burdens does this project relieve or remove? And support for furthering fair housing initiatives. Okay, next slide, please. Additionally, some of the current processes that folks are using to identify equity include focusing on access to opportunities such as jobs and education from disadvantaged communities, project benefits such as travel time by walking, biking, transit for build and no build scenarios, identifying multimodal considerations, and indicating how the project was identified. So this is the community engagement piece. So through the pipeline, through community conversations, etc. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges that we've heard from folks with incorporating equity into project development and into funding applications is that funding constraints can hamper ability to properly address equity. Localizing equity indicators within a region can be a challenge. Lack of historical data for small or rural communities. And we've heard this next one in this group also. So the inability to fund CBO participation. It's been a difficulty to obtain political support and seemingly lack of support from more affluent communities. Expressing an inability for suburbs and rural locations to compete with urban areas because they are seen as affluent, are not shown as having disproportionate impacts despite having real issues and challenges. And this one I've also heard a lot is a duplication of efforts by multiple agencies in the same geographic area, which can make it hard for folks to apply for individual projects. Next slide, please. And some of the equity metrics that we've heard from our partners include in the following matrix. So community characteristics such as number of household vehicles without access to a vehicle, language isolation and languages other than English spoken at home, percentage who qualify for free lunch, broadband access, rent burden, population density, race and ethnicity distribution, and grievances. And some of the environmental characteristics that have been brought up can be seen in the Healthy Places Index. Cal and viroscreen data, prolonged exposure to pollutants, and health burden. And I want to reiterate that all of these kind of challenges and examples that are mentioned, if our roundtable members or other folks on the line have other ideas around this, in addition to the Slido poll that we just mentioned, please feel free to reach out and add your thoughts and your expertise on this. Definitely recognize there's a lot of expertise in this virtual room. Next slide, please. All right, that's it. So yes, I will, let's see, open it up. Do you have a question, Naila? Okay, why don't we ask the question and then we will hear the update from Gerard and Connie on the focus group.
I have a comment. I can go after Gerard and Connie.
Okay, it's all right either way. Okay, thanks. Okay, so now I'll invite Gerard and Connie to join us to talk about our focus group session that we had around updating the SB1 funding guidelines. Thank you so much to both of you.
Go ahead, Jura. You can start.
I have to mute myself first or unmute myself first, and I can actually get started. At least one of the biggest takeaways from the work group session that came across to me was the need, on top of keeping it simple, but understanding that it shouldn't be the same kind of process we did with other programs. I use cap and trade as a perfect example, where there was a great need and there was a lot of resources, but there was a lot of applications at the same time. So I think and I don't want to steal Connie's thunder because I know what she's going to go to next, but just want to start on that level because I think that was a big takeaway from this conversation. And also, which we'll dovetail into, is going into not just making this, okay, this is a standalone on equity, but equity becomes the norm. And I'll pass that on to Connie to add more to that.
Yeah, thanks, Gerard. I think that one of my big takeaways was that sometimes we spend so much time on the definition of equity in order to make programs broad enough that actually what we're doing is diluting funding. And so it just so happened we had the workshop the day that an announcement came out about a tribal project where there was 6 times the applicants expected, and instead of $1 billion of projects, they got $6 billion worth of projects. So, one of the thoughts was like, I know that folks want to see themselves in that big definition, but by opening it up to make it everyone, then projects get turned in that don't necessarily advance equity, and making sure that happens. And that sort of, I keep seeing that in all of the equity programs I'm looking at. And then, but I just want to say that staff, we threw a lot of stuff at staff. I was really, really impressed with how thoughtful staff has been around this, the sincerity and the passion that they have with trying to think through these processes. We talked a lot about just the politics of whether even projects that are being promoted really have equity partners in them, or are the same political powers just determining what projects, and how can we make sure that it's not just those projects are actually generated from the communities that need the help. So I'll stop there too, and love to hear what more folks think.
Yeah, thanks so much, and definitely can open it up to a discussion with and comments and questions from the larger group.
I think my comment really well after what Connie was saying, because I think and let me also preface this, but I understand this is not an easy task. And like if there was the answer that was readily available, we probably would have already done it. But I will say that one of the things that I'm feeling when we look at the equity metrics is that it's kind of this one size fit all, as if what we're trying to do is get all communities to this ideal community, when really we need to make sure that the projects are being responsive to the community's needs. And so I'll bring up an example. I'm working on a creek restoration project in my personal life, and I've probably shared this before. And we receive funding from the Department of Water Resources. And part of their guidelines process required that the state, or not the state entity, but the local jurisdiction partners with a CBO, has an MOU as part of the contract. And what that means is that we have a community seat that's at the table for all decision making that's built into the planning process. And that's one way where at every step, at least there's one representative from the community that gets a vote. Oftentimes we are outvoted, but that still means that we're able to give our input and still means that we're able to participate. So I think that could be one way to really like infuse equity throughout a project. Just creating and building capacity for CBOs or community members by offering them a small stipend that's built into the project budget. And I don't mean to discount the my nonprofit community, but we're cheaper than consultants. And the more you go to nonprofits and CBOs and build our capacity, then the more that you're doing for economic development, like all around. So highly recommend that. And again, I think those are my only comment. Ouch, for right now.
Great
Thanks,
feedback. Thanks. Yeah, and I want to open it up to other roundtable members or also our commissioners and other CTC staff who are on the line who would be interested in contributing to this discussion with comments or questions.
So if there are no additional comments, maybe before we move to the next tab, I can give a couple next steps for this group. Because I do really value Connie and Gerard's time, as well as any other roundtable members who are willing to work, kind of in more of a focused capacity with us on some actual language to be drafted for the guidelines moving forward. And so, as I've promised Connie and Gerard, we have drafted some potential changes. So these are all draft proposed language to the guidelines themselves, which we'll be sharing with Connie and Gerard shortly after today's roundtable, which is informed by some of the feedback we received at the December workshop and that we always kind of continue to receive. I know that SB1 and equity are not siloed conversations, and we try to inform what we're doing based on all of the feedback that we're receiving at, all program workshops or all CTC meetings. And so we'll be presenting that language for some feedback from Gerard and Connie, or any other roundtable members who are interested to work with us, and then actually bringing that feedback to try and enhance the language that we're proposing to bring back to a stakeholder workshop in March. So that will be kind of like a second December 16th workshop for each of the SB1 program stakeholders. So that certainly includes roundtable members and anybody on this call, but is open to, maybe, potential applicants, so on and so forth. And so we want to actually share that language and vet it through our public process as well. So I don't want to jump in front of Sequoia on if there will be or when there will be another roundtable, equity advisory roundtable, but I imagine if there is another one or when there is another one, we will talk about that during that roundtable as well as an agenda item. So I see Commissioner Falcon. I want to give you an opportunity to chime in.
Hi, thanks, Matthew. I really appreciate, Sequoia and Matthew, you're bringing this item up to the equity working group. This is really substantive, and this is the kind of thing that I've personally been interested in seeing, really how we incorporate the work and the minds of this advisory group into something very substantive as devising guidelines for implementation of programs like SB1. And I appreciate Connie's comments about, not one size fits all. And I'm particularly interested in, the kind of metrics, that are used in different communities, because, what the needs of the rural community, for instance, is going to be different from, needs of urban communities. And so I just kind of wanted to just make a comment and sort of underscore all the good work that you're all doing, and look forward to, what comes up in June in terms of guidelines that incorporate equity into this work. So I just wanted to congratulate all of you. Thanks.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I want to say one of the other things we talked about was, and I was reminded as we were doing the poll today, we want these projects to be transformational, instead of transactional. So their benefits are not just one and done. And, I was thinking about maybe even something in the guidelines about how there is a connection between the economic development and the environmental change, or the economic development and the social change, or in an ideal world, all three are addressed in the equity proposals. So, even having this conversation again, my head is going. There's so much challenge, but there's so many opportunities here.
Right.
And I think as even with these guidelines, we're going to I just saw the passion in the staff to keep improving and keep getting better. And I just wanted to stress that to all the equity members. I was like, this is the reason I'm so glad to be part of this roundtable. And thank you very much for the opportunity to make a difference here.
Absolutely. And just piggybacking and just co-signing what Connie is saying in terms of just the amount of work staff has provided in this and has done on this, and really listening to us has been, and I felt pretty confident about it from the very beginning, because I feel a lot of it, how do you bridge the conversation on equity? It's just having a conversation and just actually listening, not just coming with a preconceived notion and say, okay, we're going to prescribe this to you, because that's the same old that hasn't worked. And now this is a real genuine opportunity for change. And I know Commissioners Liu and I know Norton has been on board a number of times and attended these sessions. So it's also good to see the commissioners listening and really being a part of the conversation as well, because they have a great role to play in terms of making these changes and being being a part of helping making that change. So kudos to everyone.
Really appreciate that.
Yeah. It's very encouraging. Thank you. Sequoia, I do also know, I'm not sure if we're going to get any public comment on this. Should we turn it over to Justin to see if there's any public comment?
Yeah, I want to wrap up
absolutely.
Commissioner and roundtable member comments or questions. Are there any more? Great. Yeah, we really, really appreciate your feedback and collaboration, and definitely the invitation is still open for our next focus group session and subsequent workshops. So if you felt fired up from this conversation, wait till it's just us.
Thank you, Sequoia.
Okay, yeah, so we'll now turn to public comment. Are there any comments on the Spanish line, Claudia?
No comments on the Spanish line. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. And Justin, are there any?
Yes, Justin.
Oh, yeah. Okay, and Justin, are there any comments, any other public comments?
Sorry, we do not have any public comment at this time. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So just to wrap up this item, I want to also add that as a newcomer to this process myself, I think it's been really, really beneficial to kind of see the progression of all of this work and realizing to just the level of what these guidelines could mean for communities. And so again, thanks for participating and supporting this work, and we look forward to further conversations. So with that, I'll wrap up this item and we'll take a break until 11, and when we will return for item 6, where we will discuss our current actions with the Equity Advisory Committee structure learning tour that we're doing. So thank you, and we'll see you back at 11.